This morning in the Middle East, where the U.S. military has sunk at least 6 small Iranian boats in the Strait of Hormuz. They say 2 U.S. Navy destroyers had to fend off a barrage of Iranian attacks as they guided commercial vessels through the strait. Defense officials say Iran launched missiles, attacked drones, and small boats at the ships being protected in the operation. The U.S. ships were not hit. This came as Iran fired missiles and drones at the UAE for the first time since the ceasefire. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said declaratively the ceasefire is not over and the new military action was an act of defense.
We have established a powerful red, white, and blue dome over the strait. American destroyers are on station, supported by hundreds of fighter jets, helicopters, drones, and surveillance aircraft, providing 24/7 overwatch for peaceful commercial vessels, except Iran's, of course, which is why our ironclad blockade remains in full effect as well. In fact, 6 ships tried to run the blockade out of Iranian ports as Project Freedom commenced, and they were all turned around.
All right, let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. So, Aaron, what stood out to you in that update from the Pentagon?
Well, you saw Secretary Hegseth and the Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Dan Kane, really downplay the escalation that we saw from Iran yesterday on the first day of Project Freedom, the U.S.-led operation to escort stranded ships in the Strait of Hormuz. At one point, General Kane noted that since the ceasefire began between the U.S. and Iran, U.S. forces have come under attack over 10 times, but it was all below the threshold of restarting major combat operations. As you saw, the two men really emphasized that what we saw yesterday does not break the ceasefire. Take a listen to more of what Secretary Hegseth said at the Pentagon earlier this morning.
No, the ceasefire is not over. Ultimately, this is a separate and distinct project, and we expected there would be some churn at the beginning, which happened. And we said we would defend aggressively, and we absolutely have. Iran knows that. This is about the straits. This is about freedom of navigation. This is about international waterways. This is about free flow of commerce, all the things that happened before, and only Iran is contesting.
Now, asked what the threshold for an attack that would break the ceasefire would be, General Dan Kane said that is a political decision above his pay grade, and said what we saw yesterday was more low-level kinetics, more of an annoyance rather than something that could escalate the war into another phase. You also saw the two leaders there say that the U.S. is now controlling the Strait of Hormuz, kind of using that rhetoric to try and instill confidence for the U.S. commercial fleet. They said that they were able to get 2 U.S.-flagged commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz yesterday as part of their escort of Project Freedom. But there is still a lot of danger there in the Strait of Hormuz, not only from Iran's military capabilities, but from the mines that they have laid in the strait. As one of the graphics shown at the Pentagon earlier this morning noted that Iran put more mines in the Strait of Hormuz in late April.
And so to that point, there was the Iranian attack on the U.S. destroyers. How's the president reacting?
Well, the president did not seem very concerned about it yesterday, but did warn that Iran would be, quote, blown off the face of the earth if they continue to attack U.S. vessels guiding those stranded ships. Those were comments made in a phone interview with Fox News, seemingly after we saw the first reports of U.S. vessels getting hit with, or getting at least targeted by Iran's military capabilities. The president did seem non-committal of all of this means the ceasefire is over. As he said yesterday, that the negotiations are still continuing and seem to suggest that Iran is showing a bit more flexibility. And at an event with small business owners at the White House, you saw the president really downplay the unpopular marks that he's getting from polls in regards to this war, as he tried to emphasize the core reason for starting this in the first place, which is preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Take a listen to what he said yesterday at the White House.
We can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon. We hit all new highs, and I said we have to take care of business because we can't let that happen. So we did a little detour, and it's working out very nicely. I call it a mini war because that's all they are. They don't have a navy anymore.
Now, we are expecting to see President Trump in several events on camera today, but we will also see Secretary of State Marco Rubio give a briefer in the White House briefing room at 3 p.m. today as he's subbing in for White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
All right, Aaron Navarro for us on the White House this morning. Thank you, Aaron.
Let's turn now to CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams, who's in Tel Aviv. So, Holly, what exactly do we know about what's actually happening on the water in the Strait of Hormuz?
Good morning, Kelly and Vlad. Well, between 1,500 and 2,000 ships are thought to be stranded because of the Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, and some of them are apparently running low on food. Now, we spoke yesterday via video link with a man named Raman Kapoor, who told us he was an Indian national and the captain of an oil tanker that's been stranded in the Persian Gulf since February when the war started. He said his ship has recently been replenished with food, so thankfully that's not a problem for them. But he told us they've seen some absolutely extraordinary things, including around 200 missiles overhead, explosions, and ships being attacked. You can only imagine how frightening it's been for him and his crew members. He said he was worried that the ceasefire between the US and Iran could now collapse because the US and Iran have now exchanged fire. And he also acknowledged that his fate is not really in his own hands. He said all he could do was his best to keep both the tanker and his 24 crew members safe and sound.
All right. So, Holly, what messaging are we seeing from Iran over what's happening in the Strait right now?
So, Vlad, as usual, we're getting two different versions of events from the US and Iran. US CENTCOM said yesterday that two American flag commercial ships transited the strait protected by a defense umbrella, including warships, helicopters and fighter jets. But Iran said yesterday that no commercial ships passed through the strait, and it maintained that it is still in control of the waterway. Then today, Iran's foreign minister posted on social media about Project Freedom, this initiative to open the strait. He said, quote, Project Freedom is Project Deadlock. Then as Aaron just mentioned, President Trump warned in an interview yesterday that Iran would be blown off the face of the earth if it attacks US ships in the Strait of Hormuz. A senior Iranian official seemed to respond to that today in a social media post. He wrote that Iran is, quote, just getting started.
All right, Holly, appreciate it.
Joining us this morning to discuss is CBS News contributor and Iraq War veteran Elliot Ackerman. Elliot, thanks so much for being with us. So, given your experience as an intelligence officer, what stood out to you in this latest update from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense? They are calling this a defensive action. It seems as if Iran is really stretching the boundaries of what could be called a ceasefire.
I think that's right. I think what the Iranians are recognizing is that if the U.S. can successfully navigate shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, that takes their greatest point of leverage, their greatest chip off the table. So the Iranians are going to fight back, pretty strongly. And also, they understand that if they can break this ceasefire, that domestically that isn't going to be good for the Trump administration at home.
We've talked to you, obviously, a bunch. You've written a number of pieces throughout this war. And I want you to reassess something that I thought was really interesting you said early on, that if you had a low-tech power like Iran able to go toe-to-toe with arguably the greatest navy in the world, that it would mark a historic realignment of naval power. Given what's going on in the Strait, do you think that that has come to pass?
I don't think that's come to pass yet for the Iranians, but I think you have the potential for a nation that doesn't have a massive navy to challenge a country that does have a large conventional navy. And the place where we've really seen this has been in Ukraine, where the Ukrainians have they have sunk or damaged almost half of Russia's Black Sea fleet over the course of that war. So, we can see the Iranians are using these asymmetric means to attack the U.S. Navy, drones, fast boats, and if they damage a U.S. Navy ship, obviously that's a story that's not going to play well for the Trump administration and would give pause to those who wanted to navigate commercial shipping through the Straits.
Just a quick follow-up on that, because I know you have something else. If that is the case, and that's sort of where we're trending, does then that make the argument against pouring a lot of money into these naval battleships?
Well, I think the U.S. military is already acknowledging the fact that when we look at future defense appropriations, we need to be also looking at more asymmetric technologies, like drones, like smaller boats. But we're seeing sort of the rise of one technology, these asymmetric technologies, occurring at the same time that we still have these large conventional battleships and aircraft carriers that, in some ways, the technology doesn't date back to the Second World War, but the ideas behind them do.
So it's so interesting, Elliot. You've also warned that the United States and its leaders are becoming, quote, drunk on the success of the U.S. military. As Kelly points out, we have the greatest, most powerful military on the face of the earth. And yet, time and time again, history has proven that that doesn't always matter. Whether you're the Vietnamese or whether you're the early iterations of Afghan Taliban in the 1970s and 80s fighting the Soviet Union, you can have a massive military. You can put it to good use. You can kill a lot of people. You can bomb a lot of infrastructure. But at the end of the day, when the president in the early days of this war said he wanted unconditional surrender, well, that's not going to happen. Now they're saying, well, no, as long as we know that they won't be able to enrich uranium, that doesn't seem like that's going to happen. So at the end, whenever this is said and done, will the U.S. be able to claim victory? It's a victory of sorts, but is it the victory that we initially envisioned that we would have?
Listen, I think it's a real challenge when the target of what victory is constantly moving around. It makes it very difficult for the military, which is ultimately, at the end of the day, just a tool to deliver that end state. And I think if we look towards history and you look at the great military miscalculations that occurred, usually right before them, there's a period of success. You know, all the way back to like commanders like Napoleon. He was winning battle after battle after battle, and then he decides to invade Russia, and there's a disaster. So, you know, drunk could be a word, but, you know, the U.S. has, in the first part of the Trump administration, has had a lot of great military success. Operation Midnight Hammer, the raid on Maduro, and we'll have to see how things work in Iran, but, you know, this is certainly proving to be the most challenging military engagement that Trump has faced in his second administration.
Really fascinating. Elliot, always great to have you. Good to have you on set, too. Thank you very much.